There is a truth in life that every God's chosen ones must know. When God elevates you, not everyone will rejoice. Some will secretly harbor hatred in their hearts because God chose you. There is a spiritual battle that wages around God's chosen ones. When heaven singles you out for blessing, the enemy immediately dispatches agents to derail your destiny. These agents often come disguised as friends, family members, and even fellow believers. They smile to your face but secretly despise the favor of God upon your life. In today's world where pretense is common and authenticity is rare, you must develop spiritual discernment to recognize those who secretly resent your anointing. You need divine wisdom to identify those who are silently angry because heaven has marked you for greatness. If this message speaks to your spirit, type "I am discerning" in the comments to declare your readiness to receive this revelation. Without further delay, let's dive into the 5 undeniable signs that someone secretly hates that God chose you. Sign number 1. They minimize your victories but magnify your mistakes. The first sign that someone secretly resents God's choice of you is that they have a peculiar way of responding to your life's events. When you experience a breakthrough, they minimize it. But when you make the slightest mistake, they magnify it beyond proportion. Listen carefully. God's chosen ones face this subtle attack more than others. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, his own sister Miriam and brother Aaron spoke against him. Numbers 12:2 tells us, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us?" They couldn't celebrate Moses' unique calling, but instead questioned his position. Notice their reaction. They couldn't rejoice in Moses' divine appointment because they were consumed with jealousy. The anointing on Moses' life threatened their position, so instead of celebrating his success, they began criticizing him. These people will hardly acknowledge your achievements. When God blesses you with a promotion, a new home, or a ministry breakthrough, they'll say things like, "Well, you got lucky," or "Anyone could have done that if they had your advantages." They diminish the significance of your blessing, trying to strip away the divine element of what God has done in your life. But watch what happens when you make a mistake. Suddenly, they become amplifiers. A small error becomes a major catastrophe in their eyes. They'll make sure everyone knows about your failure, often exaggerating the details to make you look worse. Did you hear what happened with them? I'm not surprised, considering their character. Why do they do this? Because your victories confirm God's choice of you, and that's what they resent. Your mistakes, on the other hand, give them an opportunity to question God's discernment. If God really chose them, why would they fail like this? Remember the story of Ishmael and Isaac in Genesis 21. When Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast to celebrate. But verse 9 tells us that Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac. Ishmael couldn't celebrate Isaac's special position as the child of promise. Your dreams threaten those who secretly resent God's favor on your life. Chosen ones, understand this pattern. When someone consistently downplays your successes but highlights your failures, they're revealing their hidden resentment toward God's choice of you. Their responses aren't balanced because their hearts aren't pure toward you. They're secretly hoping you'll fail so they can justify their belief that you aren't really chosen after all. Sign number 2. They compete with you in areas. God has clearly blessed you. The second sign that someone secretly resents God's choice is unwarranted competition. They specifically target areas where God has visibly blessed you, trying to outdo you or prove they're just as blessed, if not more blessed, than you are. This isn't healthy competition that spurs growth. This is spiritually motivated rivalry aimed at discrediting your anointing. In the Bible, we see this with Korah's rebellion against Moses in Numbers 16. Korah wasn't content with his own Levitical duties. He specifically challenged Moses' leadership, the very area God had clearly anointed Moses. Korah said to Moses, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" He wasn't merely suggesting an alternative leadership structure. He was directly attacking Moses' divine appointment. These people cannot stand to see you excel in your area of anointing. If God has blessed you with a teaching ministry, they'll suddenly develop an interest in teaching, often trying to correct or outshine you. If God has given you a successful business, they'll start a similar venture, not because they have a passion for it, but because they can't bear to see you succeed where they haven't. What makes this competition particularly revealing is its targeted nature. They don't compete with you in every area, just the ones where God's blessing is most evident. If you're known for your generosity, they'll make sure everyone knows when they give. If your worship leadership is touching hearts, they'll find reasons to critique your style while promoting their own. This behavior stems from a heart that questions, why them and not me? Instead of recognizing that God's gifts differ for each person, they believe your blessing somehow diminishes their own worth. Their competition isn't about excellence, it's about undermining God's choice. Look at how Haman in the book of Esther couldn't stand Mordecai's favor. Esther 5:13 reveals Haman's heart. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Haman's entire focus became destroying the person who had favor that he coveted. His competitive spirit wasn't about position, it was about resenting another's divine elevation. Chosen ones, when someone consistently tries to outdo you specifically in your areas of blessing, recognize what's happening in the spiritual realm. They're not competing with you. They're competing with God's decision to favor you in that area. Their rivalry reveals their resentment toward heaven's choice. Sign number 3, they isolate you from others who celebrate your calling. The third sign, someone secretly resents God's choice of you, is their subtle efforts to isolate you from people who genuinely celebrate your anointing. They understand a powerful spiritual principle: isolation precedes destruction. In the spiritual realm, those who resent your calling know that you draw strength from connections with people who affirm God's work in your life. So they work diligently to sever those relationships, often through gossip, misrepresentation, and creating unnecessary division. We see this tactic in the Bible with Sanballat and Tobiah when Nehemiah was rebuilding Jerusalem's walls. In Nehemiah 6:13, we learn their strategy. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. They sought to isolate Nehemiah from his support system and ruin his reputation among those who believed in his mission. These people operate similarly in your life. They'll say things like, "Did you notice how that person was treating you differently? I think they're jealous of your blessing." They plant seeds of doubt about the very relationships that strengthen you. They'll misrepresent your words to others. You know what they said about you the other day? Creating unnecessary friction between you and your supporters. They'll stir up misunderstandings and then position themselves as the only ones who truly understand you. Notice how they rarely criticize you when you're in a group that celebrates your anointing. Instead, they wait until they have you alone. Then they plant doubts. Don't you think the pastor is giving you these responsibilities just because he feels sorry for you? Or, I'm concerned that people are only supporting your ministry out of obligation, not because they see God's hand on you. Their goal is clear: to disconnect you from the community that recognizes and nurtures God's call on your life. When those connections are weakened, they know you'll be more vulnerable to discouragement and doubt. Remember how Job's wife told him to curse God and die, Job 2:9, during his suffering. She should have been his greatest support, but instead she isolated him further by suggesting he abandon his faith. The enemy knows that God designed us for community, especially with those who affirm our calling. Chosen ones, when someone consistently attempts to separate you from people who celebrate God's work in your life, recognize their true motives. They're not protecting you, they're isolating you. They don't hate your supporters. They hate that your supporters can see what God is doing in you. Sign number 4, they question your worthiness and highlight your past. The fourth sign, someone secretly resents God's choice of you, is their persistent questioning of your worthiness by highlighting your past. They simply cannot accept that God would choose someone with your history, your background, or your former failures. These individuals appoint themselves as gatekeepers of God's favor, establishing standards that even they couldn't meet. They look at your past and decide you don't qualify for the blessing God has given you. While God says, "I've chosen them," they respond, "But do you know where they've been?" In John 9:34, we see this attitude clearly displayed when religious leaders confronted the man Jesus had healed. "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" They couldn't deny the miracle, so they attacked the man's worthiness to receive it. They essentially said, "Someone like you doesn't deserve this blessing." These people will constantly remind you and others of who you used to be. Isn't that the same person who used to? They'll bring up your past mistakes, your former lifestyle, your previous failures, not because they're concerned about accountability, but because they're troubled by your elevation. They disguise their attacks as righteous concern. "I'm just worried that they haven't really dealt with their past issues." Or they'll say, "I'm not sure someone with their background should be in that position." Their words sound spiritual, but their motivation is resentment toward God's choice. Notice how they rarely extend this same scrutiny to themselves or to people they favor. Their standard of worthiness is selectively applied, rigorous for you, lenient for others. This inconsistency reveals that their issue isn't really with qualification. It's with God choosing you specifically. Consider how the people of Nazareth responded to Jesus in Matthew 13:55-57. "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers?" And they took offense at him. They couldn't reconcile Jesus' humble origins with his extraordinary anointing. Their familiarity with his background blinded them to his divine appointment. Here's a profound truth. God's choice of you was never based on your perfection, but on his purpose. He didn't choose you because you were flawless. He chose you because you fit into his divine plan. He doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. When Jeremiah was called as a prophet, he objected based on his youth and inexperience. But God told him in Jeremiah 1:5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." God's calling superseded Jeremiah's perceived limitations. Chosen ones, when someone continuously questions your worthiness by highlighting your past, recognize that their issue isn't really with you. It's with the God who chose you, despite knowing everything about you. Their resentment isn't toward your imperfection. It's toward God's sovereign right to choose whomever he wishes. Sign number 5. They rejoice when challenges arise in your calling. The fifth and perhaps most revealing sign that someone secretly resents God's choice of you is their subtle jubilation when you encounter obstacles in your calling. While their words may express concern, their spirit betrays a sense of vindication when you face setbacks. These individuals have been waiting for evidence that God made a mistake in choosing you. So when difficulties arise, as they inevitably will for every chosen vessel, these people experience a hidden satisfaction. "See, I knew they weren't really chosen for greatness. I knew God's hand wasn't really on them." In the book of Job, we see this attitude in his friends. Initially, they came to comfort him, but as his suffering continued, they began suggesting that his calamities proved God was punishing him. They couldn't reconcile Job's righteousness with his suffering, so they assumed his suffering disproved his righteousness. These people will be the first to point out problems in your ministry, business, or calling. "Have you noticed their numbers are declining?" Or, "I heard they're having financial difficulties in their project." They present these observations as concerns, but their spirit communicates something entirely different. Relief that your calling is being challenged. They'll offer help during your struggles, but their assistance comes with subtle reminders of your inadequacy. Maybe this difficulty is God's way of showing you that you've misunderstood his calling. Their counsel doesn't strengthen you. It undermines your confidence in God's choice. What makes this behavior particularly telling is their selective concern. They don't respond this way to everyone's challenges. just yours. When others face similar obstacles, these same individuals offer genuine encouragement and express confidence that God will see them through. But when it's you, there's a different energy behind their words. Remember how Shimei responded when King David was fleeing Jerusalem during Absalom's rebellion? In 2 Samuel 16 verse 8, Shimei came out cursing David and throwing stones at him, saying, Get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul." Shimei rejoiced in David's moment of crisis, interpreting it as divine judgment rather than divine testing. There's a spiritual principle at work here. Those who resent God's choice of you will interpret your challenges as confirmation of their suspicions, rather than as the refinement that every chosen vessel must undergo. Understand this, chosen ones. The very obstacles they hope will disqualify you are often the very means God uses to prepare you. Noah faced ridicule while building the ark. Elijah fled into the wilderness before his greatest victories. Daniel was thrown into a den of lions before his promotion. When someone secretly rejoices at your struggles, they reveal their fundamental misunderstanding of how God works with his chosen vessels. They don't understand that in God's economy, challenges don't disprove your calling, they confirm it. Now that you can identify those who secretly resent God's choice of you, how should you respond to them? Should you confront them? Avoid them? Try to win them over? First, understand that their issue isn't primarily with you, it's with God. In Exodus 16:8, when the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, Moses told them, "You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Similarly, those who resent God's choice of you are ultimately expressing dissatisfaction with God's decision. Therefore, your first response should be prayer, not just for yourself, but for them. Like Stephen, who said, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them," as he was being stoned, Acts 7:60. Recognize that many who oppose you don't fully understand the spiritual dynamics at play. They don't realize they're fighting against God's anointing. Second, maintain your integrity. Don't give them legitimate reasons to question God's choice. When Nehemiah faced opposition while rebuilding Jerusalem's walls, he maintained his integrity and focus. He said in Nehemiah 6:8, "Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head." Your character must remain above reproach. Third, continue fulfilling your calling regardless of their resentment. When Paul and Silas were imprisoned for preaching the gospel, they didn't abandon their calling. Acts 16:25 tells us they were praying and singing hymns to God even in their chains. Don't allow others' resentment to distract you from your divine assignment. Fourth, guard your heart against bitterness. It's natural to feel hurt when people you care about resent God's blessing on your life. But Hebrews 12:15 warns us to see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Don't let their resentment produce resentment in you. Finally, remember that their response to your anointing is a test, not just for them, but for you. How you handle those who resent God's choice reveals your own spiritual maturity. Isaiah 54:17 promises, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you." This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Your response to resentment can become part of your testimony. Chosen ones, not everyone will celebrate God's choice of you. Some will secretly resent the favor on your life. But don't let that discourage you. Every vessel God has significantly used faced opposition, often from those who should have been their greatest supporters. Remember that God didn't choose you because everyone would approve. He chose you for His purposes, according to His wisdom. And as Zechariah 2:8 assures us, whoever touches you touches the apple of His eye. God takes personally any opposition to those He has chosen. Stay focused on the one who chose you, not on those who question His choice. Let God vindicate you in His time. And know this, the very resentment you face today confirms the authenticity of your calling. The enemy wouldn't waste resources opposing you if God hadn't marked you for something significant. If this message has strengthened your resolve to fulfill God's calling despite opposition, type "I will stand firm" in the comments. Like and share this message with someone who needs encouragement today. Remember, your greatest days are not behind you. They're still ahead. Stay faithful to your calling and watch how God confirms His choice of you in ways that leave even your critics in awe of His wisdom.